In today's video we're going to paint the Malignant Plaguecaster. The first step is the obvious black undercoat because I want to try and keep these miniatures fairly dark. And the next part I've chose to start with is a little bit on the messy side. So I want to cover all the areas where I want the rust, and I've started off with Rhinox hide first. And then, as you can see, I'm using an old brush where the bristles are spread out, and I'm using this to apply riser rust. And you just have to dab it in, and it gives you these two tones there between the darker and lighter parts of the rust. For the main colour for the armour, I've started off with Death Guard Green first, and this will help to tidy up any of the areas where you've ended up applying the orange where you didn't want it, to clean all that up. Hence why I did the rust parts first. For the highlights on the armour, I've used Nurgling Green, and I only need one coat for the highlights. However, I've also used this green for the flesh areas, in which I've applied 2 coats of the Nurgling Green to give it a good base coat. Now, to add some depth into the armoured areas, I've thinned down some Agrax Earthshade with some Lamia Medium, and this helps it to want to sink into the recessed areas, and it gives it a bit of depth. But because I'm using Agrax Earthshade as opposed to a green colour, it also helps to give it a slightly more dirtier look to the armour. Now we're going to leave the armour alone for a while and do a little bit of work on the skin areas, of which I've used a mix of Nurgling Green and Upshapti Bone to give the flesh areas a little bit of a highlight. For the guts and intestines, because we're going over a black undercoat, I've had to apply a couple of coats of red. I'm using an old pot of red called Blood Red, and once a couple of coats, maybe even 3 coats, have been applied, Blood for the Blood God was applied afterwards, and this gives it that nice juicy look for the intestines. For the white parts here, first off I started with Corax White, and again you'll want a couple of coats just to make sure you've got a good base coat. And then I've applied a small amount of white scar just to catch out the uppermost areas to bring a bit more life to the cloth parts of the miniature. The hat on this miniature was initially Bugman Glow, which again took a couple of coats just to get a good base coat of it, and then I applied Keslev Flesh over the top of it. But with the Keslev Flesh I wanted to apply it more as a dry brush, so it just picked out little pieces of little flecks over the fleshy area. And when it was finally dry, Reeking Flesh Shade was thinned down a little bit with some Lamia Medium and applied onto the area. This helps to tone in the 2 colours, and it also can help to add a little bit of depth of darkness into any recesses. For the brass areas, we started with Gehenna's Gold first, and again it's quite possible you might need to apply more than 1 coat, and I wanted these again to have a nice rustic look rather than having a nice shiny gold to them. So I applied a green weathering powder to the area, and the weathering powder had some Lamia Medium added to it first, and this way it basically turns it into a paint, but when it's dry it will give it quite a dull look rather than a shiny glossy look of paint, and I think this gives it an end result that looks quite impressive. For the areas where we've got the horns, again I want these miniatures to look quite dark, so I've used Mechanica Standard Grey initially for the horns, and I've then used Nurgling Green just to pick out the sharper parts of the horns, and this helps to add a bit of colour to the horns, but it also helps to tie in the horns somewhat into the greens of the rest of the miniature. However, if you prefer a more brown looking type of horn, I've got a video that covers that, so you can always look at that video. For the magic or smoke that's coming out of the hand, I used cloaks white first, and again it needed a couple of coats, and this is really easy to paint because all I had to do after this was use Seraphim Sepia, and it will naturally want to go into the recesses, and I think it gives it a nice putrid kind of look about the gas that's coming out. For the deep holes on the armour, a rust weathering powder had some Lamia medium applied, and it was put into these areas, and later on a little bit of Agrax Earthshade was also put onto the armour to show areas where water is dripping down the armour, and as it's dripping down the armour it's also picking up those bits of rust and leaving these streak marks. If you like the video, remember to subscribe, click the notification bell, and also share the video with your friends.